morning.
Morning.
Good morning. This is Hap May with the Legal Play.
And I am Chelsea El-Azzi, Hap's associate. Hap, we've been given a homework assignment to do a particular podcast.
Re-election.
Pre-election tax implications.
Right. And that's something that there are a lot of issues in this race to direct the focus away from taxes, which is fine. That's elections have a lot of issues and stuff like that. Today we're going to focus though on sort of the implications for tax law, talk about what changes are on the horizon for tax law, even without any particular action by the political candidates, Congress, and the president, and kind of discuss what I generally think would be the direction would go one way or another based upon which presidential candidate gets elected.
But I do want to insert here, this is not, who Hap May would recommend you vote for. This is not.
That's right, and this is tend to be kind of informative and discussions about sort of what tax law is and what it's likely to become and how it might differ depending upon who gets elected president and who gets elected to Congress.
Okay, which that's a
to set the course, in 2017, Congress passed a largely Republican tax law. So that act was called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and it had a somewhat significant change in the way taxes were done and what was deductible and not deductible, what the rates were. In particular, it dropped the corporate rate down to a flat 21% from what had been something more like 35 in the process.
That's significant.
That is significant. It took away a lot of deductions that there would be in the process. And the idea of that was that other countries were taxing corporations much lower in order for American corporations to be competitive and to avoid having companies keep money offshore and have activity offshore so they could pay less taxes. And by and large, that has worked. There's been less offshoring of money in the process. And regardless who gets elected, I don't expect that corporate rates go back to 35. In the process, I think it is, that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has many provisions that will expire in December of 2025. So in 2026, we'll have largely the old tax law will come back into effect, and this is estate planners talk about that because the lifetime exclusion of income is roughly now about $13.5 million. That would go back down to about $7 million, which is where it would be if the old law was in effect. Then there are state and local taxes, which are the deductions are limited to $10,000. That would go back up in the process. And there are a whole series of changes that were made that would go back to where they were before. So it is highly likely that we get some kind of tax bill out of Congress because both sides have needs and constituents that you will have desires to not go back to where we were in 2016 as far as tax law is concerned. So we have this election, and we have two different candidates that will diverge greatly on a number of issues. Taxes being one of them. And so we are likely. I'm looking at the polls, and it's likely that we are going to have a Republican House. We do now. It's likely that number goes up, and that I'm not promoting one way or another. I just think that's likely to happen. And it looks like the Republicans are going to wind up with 51 seats in the Senate, meaning that they control both houses. And if, in fact, the Republican candidate for president is elected, we would have that trifecta they talk about, which makes getting legislation easier. And I would expect if that happens, you would largely look at retaining most of the tax cuts and job acts. Those that are set to sunset. Probably the starting point for designing is assume that they don't sunset, and then start to tweak. We may get back, even if the Republicans get elected, we may get back the state and local tax deductions, or at least more than the $10,000 that we're allowed now. That may happen. Expect that to be more likely to happen if Vice President Harris is elected. One of the things that doesn't sunset is a 21% corporate rate. I would think if
That you're saying if either candidate gets elected, presidential candidate gets elected, the 21% would likely stay?
I don't think so. I mean, it will stay. It does not sunset.
Oh,
So if
okay.
there was no tax law passed, the 21% tax rate would continue.
Okay.
And I would suspect that there's more likely that if the Democrats have the ability to do so either through compromise or maybe they don't, maybe they have control one of the houses, or maybe in 2 years from now in the midterm elections they gain back one or both houses in the process. But at some point in time, I think there's going to be some pressure from the Democratic side to push that corporate rate higher than 21%. Not go back to 35, but I mean, they're still talking about 25, 28, see what the process was. I think that is something I would think likely.
The averages internationally?
Well, there are treaties that are going around that try to set a minimum of 15.
Mm-hmm.
And the Inflation Reduction Act actually had for $1 billion corporations has this corporate minimum tax that is 15. They can't take advantage of any tax perks to drop the level down below 15%. The average is high. The average is I think the United States is probably pretty average.
Okay.
With regard to corporate rates. There's some obviously higher, but if you get higher, then people try not to have productive, profitable activities that are taxed in that country. So that's the rub with regard to that. So and the Democrats, they're going to want to do things. They're going to want to give more benefits to the poor and middle class, and also incentivize certain green activities and social. They're going to want to do that. I mean that's and they're going to have to fund that. The money's going to have to come somewhere. I think a rise in the corporate income tax is likely to fund that, at least in part.
I feel like it depends, depending on who you vote for, tax wise and just economic wise. It depends on your business or how it's going to affect you personally.
Yes, no doubt about that.
Um,
There are industries that are basically subsidized through various tax provisions.
right. And I feel like, you talking about depending on where you have yourself based or your business activities internationally would potentially largely depend on the nature of your business too.
Yes.
We're not in import export tax or anything like,
No,
business,
we're not.
but,
We're not.
But tariffs have, a large effect on some, people's business and
That's that's the flip side. I mean, to the extent the Republicans get in, at least I mean, Donald Trump has promoted. I'm not sure this is something the Republicans have consistently over the years supported, but he has talked about tariffs. Now, you've had tariffs in the past, basically designed to sort of punish a country or punish, some activity for, trying to take advantage of international trade and to dominate and to protect American jobs, American business from time to time from unfair competitors. There is some discussion within the Trump camp as to whether or not we should not have tariffs that are designed to be a revenue source for the country, so that if there are more tax cuts or additional spending or something like that, and we need to raise taxes to cover the from some source to allow for those cuts in other areas and for financing for whatever sort of expansion we have in the federal budget, that maybe we could rely upon tariffs. A lot of economists don't like that.
I'm not sure that that's actually working. I mean, granted, I for very, very briefly, I worked at an international trade firm and just got to see what actual clients do. And it's trying their best to avoid paying those tariffs, even
Yes.
if it means moving their production to other countries.
Yes.
And so I don't know that anybody's like, we'll just take the hit and pay into the
Well,
American government.
and that's I mean the thought was if we because there are issues with China and their trade practices, we put a tariff on China.
There's India too.
The India, Vietnam, Malaysia, people can move. But if what I'm hearing the discussion is, I'm not sure that their proposal, but at least the concept is, if we just had a blanket import tariff that applies to every country, then can that become a revenue source to help fund the federal government on an ongoing basis? And I think if Trump gets elected and the Republicans get elected, there may be a temptation to kind of toy with that idea and see where it goes. I suspect there'll be lobbies against it. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
and I think that it will distort the economy and probably have an inflationary impact because goods will become more expensive in the United States because we have to pay an import duty or pay an American domestic producer, which does so at a higher cost. So that will have that effect. Now,
speaking of the distortion effect and inflation, and would that be affected by any changes to the tax laws?
the answer to that is yes. I mean, any time you tax, whether it's an import tax or an income tax or anything, it has its distortive effect on the economy. I mean, to tax something, makes it, less productive to do that.
Right. So, I mean, do you anticipate there being a big change in 2025 with either house, with either, whoever might get voted in, is what I'm saying.
I'm thinking there could be there's some new things that are being discussed that haven't been discussed, before.
Such as,
I mean the tariffs, the idea of and of course in recent years we've with the Inflation Reduction Act, which really has a lot of green, tax credits in it, in the process, using the tax code to promote an environmental policy. And those concepts are going to come in, make taxes more complicated. The possibility of tariffs could make things more complicated, something we haven't done in the United States since early days, where we rely on taxes on import export to fund the country. And those are kind of the things that are going. I mean, it's I wish we had more money. I wish we had a steadier source. I wish we could sort of try to figure out what government can and cannot do. It changes with administrations. It changes within economies, and so the tax system changes. I would prefer that there be a steady, regular tax system that gets adjusted here and there as government needs. But it seems.
What would that take to get there, though?
Well, probably a more steady government, because I mean, I have
But like you'd have to have everybody just kind of agree. This works.
Yeah,
this is what works. Let's just keep this in place.
And unfortunately, it kind of works. It's the answer and process. And the Republicans will get in and they'll want to cut taxes, and they'll want to cut spending, and they'll want to focus on certain incentives to various industries within the economy. Democrats come in. I mean, they generally speaking want to have a more promote more social programs and in recent years environmental programs. So they get in and they change things and perhaps have a little higher tax rate and perhaps direct that money to some
higher tax rate for corporations or the higher tax
and higher tax brackets, yes, in the process. That's
in your years as an accountant, a tax lawyer, and just a citizen of the United States and a voter. Have you seen a particular system that tends to work better as far as just having a healthier overall economy?
In 1986. There was a significant bipartisan effort to simplify the tax code. I mean, whether it simplified it or not, I don't know. It got rates down low, limited deductions, got rid of a lot of incentive to do things like tax shelters, and that seemed to work fairly well. Then things happened, and basically the incentives that to engage in certain types of activities. Capital gains rates were lowered. Clinton came in, raised the tax rates. Bush came in, gave some tax cuts. Military spending, got there. I mean, we were looking at. We used to talk about a balanced budget. A couple of times we were headed in that direction, but lately it's been the Democrats get in, they spend more money. The Republicans get in, they cut taxes. the federal, treasury is rated one way or another by that. And I mean, I wish we could, kind of look at, balanced budget issues, and kind of get that under control, because I think a large federal deficit also distorts the economy in the process.
Yes.
The fact so we're all going to vote. Actually, early voting has started.
Yes.
I, for the purposes of this podcast, I am not encouraging anybody to vote one way or another. I just kind of wanted to give everybody a feel for the fact that one, taxes are an important issue this year, because we got a federal tax law that is going to expire in 2020, in 2026, or the end of 2025. And I don't think either party really wants to go back to what it was in 2016. And it's likely, whatever happens, we're going to have some sort of new tax bill come forth next year. And the kind of decision is on the issue, who do you want to be the president who either signs or vetoes that bill in the process? And kind of figure out what the tax implications of that are.
I've got one final question, though. I mean, I'm sure I'll have several towards the end of this. But let's say that there is a majority Republican House and Senate, and let's say we have a Democratic president. I mean, is it very unlikely that she would veto something that the House and the Senate came up with?
Well, I think at the point at that time is if the Republicans tried to put together a package that they liked and that many Democrats didn't like, that President Harris, in this hypothetical, would be presented with various bills that said, okay, here is a bill that does this to the tax system. She would have to compare that to what happens if she signs nothing, because there will be a tax law. I mean, it's not as if the taxes will go away. There will be a tax bill that would reflect more like what things were in 2016. So if the Republicans came up with, a plan that was, what I think the Democrats would call too top heavy, gives too much breaks to businesses and individuals, the Democrats, who would not control Congress under this hypothetical,
put pressure on
would put pressure and basically say the bill the Republicans have is worse than what the pre-2017 bill, so veto it. I mean, that's and the trick would be to come up with a compromise,
which is what they will likely do in either situation.
And that's probably true. And that's probably true in the process. I mean, obviously, if the Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they have less incentive to compromise.
I still think they would, to some extent.
I think they would too. I think they would too. I mean, I think that there are, not all Republicans would be on board with, the most radical Republican proposal there would be, and there would be some compromise. And the thing about taxes is, I mean, the states that have heavy state income taxes will want to put back the deduction, and that's not. I mean, there are some Republican, congressmen and senators in those states that may on that sub issue align with Democrats. So it is a complicated system. It's a complicated political system, and something is going to happen, and a big influence on what happens will be exercised by whoever is present.
Yes, and I mean, do your research. Basically, if you have a strong opinion on the tax system and how it might play out in the future, just do your research on kind of, I guess, how it works and what tends to happen if there's a majority Democrat or majority Republican or
and
Democratic president or Republican president, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's what's up this year. I just want to kind of get a feel for what's going and kind of get everybody to realize the fact that that's a big issue. I mean, there are some other issues, but everybody pays taxes, or everybody's impacted by the tax law and stuff like that. So this is this is not a special interest issue, although special interests obviously have their thing, but it's in everybody's interest to come up with a tax bill that works, or at least works better than if we do nothing and the law changes on its own.
And we'll check back in after the election, once we know a little bit more about who was finally elected, and we'll have some updated talks.
All right.
All right.
Go out and vote.
Thanks, Hap.
All right. This is Hap May with Legal Play.